Fly Me to the Moon, directed by Greg Berlanti, stars Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum. Sparks fly in all directions as marketing maven Kelly Jones, brought in to fix NASA's public image, wreaks havoc on Apollo 11's launch director Cole Davis's already difficult task of putting a man on the moon. When the White House deems the mission too important to fail, Jones is directed to stage a fake moon landing as backup as the countdown truly begins. I only really know about this movie due to word of mouth from one of my fellow cinephile friends, along with seeing probably a total of one trailer for the whole thing. But despite the trailer doing a bad job at showcasing what this movie had to offer, I was intrigued enough to see it based on the premise alone, along with its star power. All of these factors were enough to convince me to see the movie. Start with the performances. Firstly, I thought Scarlett Johansson did a pretty good job here. One of the things she has to manage in this role is doing a plethora of different accents, as we find out early on. She isn't who she says she is, as she uses many different identities throughout her life. Many actors can either nail accents or completely butcher them, and I'm happy to say Scarlett Johansson flips between them very naturally and seems to have a good understanding of all these different types of dialects that not only she, but her character would have to learn. Along with this, she brings a great deal of force to her performance with a striking deal of determination in order to get what she needs. In this role, she is a marketing person, so it's cool to see her lean into the slimy ways people like this can be towards people, especially early on in the movie. However, rather than this coming across as unlikable, we're treated to learning more about her quick enough as the movie goes on, and we realize why she is like the way she is. On top of this, her chemistry with Channing Tatum is really good too. From the first time we see these two characters, you can tell they have a strong sense of attraction to one another, and the pair of them pull this off really well. Channing Tatum is pretty good here too. He's given some decent comedic moments here, and I think his performance more than anything really sells the jokes he has to work with. It always felt like his delivery and mannerisms alone is what would always give me and the audience I was surrounded by the laughs that were demanded in those moments, rather than the actual jokes themselves, which I'll touch up more on later. Like I mentioned, he and ScarJo have good chemistry here. It was interesting taking their characters in somewhat the enemies to lovers angle, despite them clearly being into each other, but at the same time, I don't know if this angle worked as much as the writers would have hoped, since their romance doesn't act as a will they won't they situation. It's made clear during many moments of the movie that they will end up together. He brings his usual charm and charisma to the role that he's essentially built his entire career off of, and I get it. Along with his comedy, it's one of the things he does best at. This makes his character easily likable, identifiable, and sympathetic in a lot of moments. Jim Rash, most famous obviously from Community, plays a wannabe director in this movie, and he does that part really well here. It's a joy to see him lean into the pretentious, overly dramatic prima donna type of director that demands everything to be perfect, as he sells these over the top moments with his brand of comedy. Every time he was on screen, I couldn't help but have a smile on my face the entire time. Not only does he radiate this aura of joy to his role, but he chews up the scenery whenever he's in a scene too, and manages to steal all the scenes he's in, no matter who he's acting against in these same scenes. He was definitely one of the highlights of the movie and one of the more comedic characters that worked well. Woody Harrelson, for the times he's in the movie, is good. However, I feel like he was underutilized, as he isn't on screen too much until mainly the last act of the movie. He's able to play up this dickhead role well, as he acts as the central main antagonist of the movie, but thankfully he's not comedically or even comically evil. He's more of an antagonist in context of the movie. He isn't even given much comedic moments as I would have hoped either. He has a great deal of comedic side to him that I feel could have worked for this role, but not much is really done with him outside of that. The story of this movie at its core is interesting. It's funny, as this is the second movie of 2024 to feature the space race, the other one of course being the Jerry Seinfeld movie Unfrosted. I think this movie brings the context of the time period out a lot better than that movie. The events of this movie don't really act as a metaphor for the space race. Instead, the space race is a semi-important plot point that does raise the stakes in this movie, and you understand why it's so important way more than how the Unfrosted movie could ever try to convey. I do think at the same time this movie sits on the fence on where it stands about the moon landing in itself, maybe so it could appeal to a broader audience. The broader audience, of course, meaning the dipshits that actually believe the moon landing was fake. Now, while this movie has a plot point of fake the moon landing in an attempt to beat the Russians quicker, it doesn't act as using that as an excuse for this idiotic theory to be real. However, they clearly clearly have nods to those conspiracy theories, even adding in the nod to the fact that many people believe the fake moon landing was directed by Stanley Kubrick. I thought seeing these nods and the attempts to truly capture the realism of the moon was humorous despite all this. I was worried with the way ScarJo's character is portrayed in the latter half of this movie would lean into the liar reveal subplot, and in a way it doesn't, and it does, but it basically dwells on that for only a brief moment and quickly shoves that plot point aside so the characters can deal with the main conflict, which I thought was a good way of getting around this tired, monotonous plot point that we've seen countless times. The big thing I think doesn't work in this, despite a lot of praise I've been given it, is I think the humor really falls flat at times. This movie really isn't all that funny, or at least not as funny as the writers thought it would be. Now, in saying that, I will admit I did get a few chuckles throughout the runtime, but I feel like a lot of these were more earned from the actors' methods of delivering the jokes, from how they're said to the way they convey it. I always thought worked because the actors knew how to take this mediocre material and elevate it to make it slightly funnier than it was written to be, but even with that, they don't elevate it to a great extent. It never generated laugh out loud moments for me, and I think people are going to go into this thinking it'll be a riot. They're going to find themselves pretty disappointed. Daniel Pemberton did the score for this movie, and for the people who may not recognize him by name, he's probably most famous for composing the scores for both Spider-Verse movies. Those scores are really great and exciting and all around brilliant pieces of music. However, for this movie, I don't think his talents shine through to their full extent here. The music is passable and granted fits the scenes they're in, which is always a good thing, but other than that, they're a bit bland and sometimes blend together. No track really stands out as much, so it's nothing too amazing to write home about. Maybe this composer isn't always pumping out incredible tracks, but seeing his name here and connecting him to Spider-Verse, I definitely expected more. Overall, I did have a decent time with this movie. The only other negatives I can think of is that I think the pacing isn't handled too great near the latter half. This really feels like the movie could have been told in 100 minutes rather than 130. The third act especially felt a bit sluggish, even with the really cool looking footage of the spacecraft going into space, some of this footage of which was a mixture of the movie's recreations and the real footage of the Apollo 11 mission. But at the end of the day, this movie is cute when it comes to the romance subplot. There's a lot of really sweet moments between the two leads, which is all down to really great chemistry. I'm giving Fly Me to the Moon 3.5 stars. It features some pretty good performances, but nowhere near any of the actors' best work. A decent summary of historical events that people of the newer generation might not know about. A sickly sweet romance that is elevated greatly by its two leads, but for a comedy really misses the mark at a good majority of its runtime, the runtime of which is unfortunately a little too bloated for a story like this. Putting all of these negatives aside, however, I will still recommend people to go check this movie out in theaters, since as of now it's currently one of the only few original movies in the cinema at the moment, and no matter its quality, I'm a firm believer that most original movies deserve to be viewed at the big screen.